Through trying moments and victories, every day begin again.
For our patients, for our communities, for each other, you can count on us to show up.
Kindness is powerful because sometimes the best medicine isn't medicine at all. Kindness is powerful because sometimes the best medicine isn't medicine at all.
Smart, kind, brave. We are the people of HCA Healthcare.
Through trying moments and victories, every day begin again.
Hello, I'm Mitchell Ferman, energy and economy reporter with the Texas Tribune. Thank you for tuning in for our conversation on COVID and its impact on the state economy and workforce. This is the second event of our three-part series on the persistence of the pandemic as we enter year 3. Learn more about events in the series at texastribune.org/events. I'm joined today by Julian Alvarez, Alfreda Norman, and Audrey Schroyer. Alvarez, a Texas Workforce Commissioner representing labor, ensures that the interests of more than 14 million Texas workers are considered in Texas Workforce Commission actions. Previously, he served as CEO of the Rio Grande Valley Partnership. Norman is Senior Vice President of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, where she oversees the communications and public outreach programs. Previously, she served as Vice President of Community Development for the institution. Schroyer has been the Executive Director of the Gainesville Economic Development Corporation since 2020. Previously, she worked for the Brazos Valley Economic Development Corporation and the Abilene Industrial Foundation. Schroyer serves on the Board of Directors for the Texas Economic Development Council. Thanks for joining. Let's get started. Mr. Alvarez, first question, a thorny issue for businesses and for workers has been over vaccine mandates in the workplace. What do you think about vaccine mandates in the workplace?
Well, we know that Texans are not required to have the COVID-19 vaccination to go back to work here in Texas. And as we get cases that come to us on Tuesdays during our commission meeting, or my attorneys that are reviewing cases all the time, these are case-by-case basis. And so what we encourage our employers is to continue to monitor the CDC guidelines, OSHA, and of course, what HHSC does. What are their recommendations and what's coming out of their offices?
And Ms. Norman, at the Fed, you've worked on economic inclusion for lower income communities. How do workplace vaccine mandates or lack thereof impact lower income communities in Texas?
Well, as you know, the COVID pandemic has really been tough for the low and moderate income individuals and families and communities. It's not a simple thing in terms of the vaccination. Obviously, thinking about community and health of a community, you want to make sure that everyone is vaccinated and can be healthy. It's difficult when you're navigating the workplace and you are an essential worker, or you're working in retail in an environment where you're with people. And it becomes complicated when you do, say, get sick. There are many folks that don't want to actually declare that they're sick, because then they lose 10 days of work because they have to quarantine. So it's it's not an easy matter. And unfortunately, low to moderate Black and Hispanics have had a higher mortality as a result of COVID as well. So you can't not want to say that everyone should be vaccinated and protect themselves. At the same time, there's economic factors in which people are trying to support their families and having to make really difficult decisions.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to come back to the frontline workers, but Ms. Schroyer, you started your job right before the pandemic and an economic recession started. How have you and businesses in Gainesville navigated the pandemic?
It was an interesting start to the position, I won't lie. I came into the role mid-February of 2020, and then we got word that COVID was really, really running rampant across the United States, and especially through Texas. Here in Gainesville, luckily, because we're a rural community and being far enough away from a metroplex region, of course, we did struggle through the pandemic, as did everybody. But because of being a smaller community, because of the local leadership that we had to roll out vaccines when they were available to city employees and then anyone that wanted to sign up for the vaccine, we had those measures in place that the local community could come in and get themselves vaccinated if they wanted to. But talking about the business community, there was a good period of time where things were uncertain. Nobody knew what was going to go on. Our largest employer here was tied to the airline economy, and they manufacture seats for airlines. So that was a pretty big hit that we took for one of our largest employers. But then on top of that, later on in March, we had the oil and gas crash. And a lot of our businesses here are tied to the energy sector as well. So there were a couple of months where we did not know where things were going to go from there. But I will say that once all of these measures were put into place, so going back to work, social distancing, mask, all of the PPE that was provided for those businesses, some of them actually ended up having record revenue years once they were able to get back to their operations. And in a little bit, I'm sure we'll talk about diversification through economy, but that's really what happened. All of our businesses looked at what we had to do from a community standpoint and a business standpoint to start diversifying what they were going to do in their own workplaces and then just generally across their industries.
And you mentioned manufacturing. I know it's obviously a cornerstone of the Texas economy, but also a huge part of the economy there, right? In Gainesville, what did the manufacturing industry in the Gainesville area learn from the pandemic?
Not to use the most overused term of 2020, but they learned how to pivot. They learned how to look beyond what they knew as their comfortable customer client base and then look beyond that, how they could diversify, how they could get into different product lines, maybe how they could cross-train employees if there were layoffs or there are those that decided to retire or maybe leave voluntarily from their position, trying to figure out how to cross-train those employees so they could keep up with operations. So that was another component of diversification, not just in what are we going to do from terms of our supply chain, but how are we going to manage our people as well.
Yeah. And Ms. Norman, you mentioned the essential workers, and a large portion of essential workers during the pandemic were low-income workers. But a lot of those workers are not necessarily paid as if they're essential, right? I mean, what has the pandemic shown about economic division in Texas?
Well, I will say that maybe the looking for the good in a crisis. People realize the importance of essential workers, the importance of workers to their businesses, where maybe perhaps took that for granted. That also included childcare that goes along with that. So those important essential workers can go to work, and suddenly, one realizes how important that industry is and those workers are. And so, if there's anything that has happened, is that the worker has perhaps a stronger voice in the sense of their importance to keeping the businesses going. They're showing up and being there in these essential times. And so, if anything, this is what we're learning now, is the worker's voice is a little bit stronger.
And how do you see kind of the future of these types of jobs and these workers going forward?
Well, as Audrey was mentioning, the pivoting part, and I think our economy is going to ask for that. Going forward with technology-enabled disruption, now it's COVID, but in the future, we're going to have lots of technology coming down. And getting workers cross-trained, getting workers prepared for the future economy is essential. And I think one of the things we realize is that pretty much as a country, we've not done a good job of preparing people for those 21st century jobs, getting people to learn new skill sets so that they can apply those to the new skills that are required to run new machinery or to be an assistance to artificial intelligence. And so this notion of developing the workforce to be prepared for these jobs. So lots of jobs opening, right? A lot of jobs are opening, but there's a lot of folks that can't match the skill sets that are needed for it. So if anything, it's an eye-opener for what we need to do to retrain our workforce.
And Commissioner Alvarez, you of course represent labor. What do you make of what Ms. Norman just said and kind of the low-income workforce here and going forward?
I'll tell you what, if I was there with Ms. Norman, I would give her a big hug, because we're drinking out of the same cup. when we talk about training, upskilling, and technology. We have been so creative during this pandemic. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that, we were receiving folks calling in all the time regarding their unemployment insurance claims. We had 8.6 years of unemployment insurance claims that were coming in to the office and that we did, which is probably a 3-year period. Can you imagine that we took care of 3 years and 13 months of unemployment insurance claims, but we still were able to become innovative and think outside the box, working with people like Gainesville, talking to them about what industry was doing, what they needed. Industry was driving what we at the Texas Workforce were going to do next. And so it's kind of cool what you're saying, because there are some communities, and I know that Alfred is very interested in broadband. We allowed our workforce boards to be able to use some of their money to purchase hotspots or be able to purchase this technology or broadband service so that these kids in rural areas could actually have access to their computers. We just took an initiative here where we're allowing our outreach specialists an opportunity to purchase these VR glasses, virtual reality glasses for career exploration. I mean, technology's everywhere. And so it's kind of cool because every occupation that we're seeing there, whether it's in South Texas, when we're talking to folks that are in the trucking industry and the group in Mexico who are focusing on autonomous vehicles, someone has to train them. And that's what we're doing. But everything that we're doing is industry driven. So we're listening to the Federal Reserve Bank. We're listening to the EDCs around the state. We want them to tell us what services we can provide and how we can facilitate their workforce needs.
Yeah, and you mentioned the unemployment claims, and of course, your agency handles jobless aid, and received millions of applications. Oh, yeah. I mean, what lessons did you learn from that?
Well, technology played a big role. I mean, we thought outside the box. We were able to get this Larry the chatbot, and it answered over 19 million calls. I mean, can you imagine 19 million different questions came in? We were the only ones in the country that were using this. And that's including the expansion of our call centers, both in English and Spanish. We were able to serve those folks. And we were even taking calls from other states because of the hours that we were open. In El Paso, the difference in the time zone allowed us to work a little later. But we were listening to what you all were saying, and that was they wanted their claims taken care of. We did our very best to answer those. But technology played a major role. When I said we actually incorporated Larry the chatbot, that came from Larry, our executive director that was here before. And what a great idea. And now other states have implemented the same type of answering service. And again, being able to have individuals, folks that were working in Texas, answer calls. At some point, Mitchell, we were receiving 62 calls every second of the day. Imagine that, 62 calls every second of the day. We were busy, but even during that time, we were still able to work with our partners that we have here today with us, making sure that we were able to still fulfill that workforce need. Yeah.
And Ms. Norman, the commissioner mentioned a little bit of trade with Mexico, and just in general, supply chain issues, of course, have impacted the world. So many people are still seeing disruptions in daily life. What is your view from the Fed on the supply chain issues, and like what is Texas's role in all of this?
Well, that's a good question. That's lots of places to go with that question. I guess what I would start with first is that during COVID, or the 5 quarters that happened during COVID, we had 174,000 migrants into the state of Texas. And that's up from, normal times. So we've got this huge influx of individuals coming into our state. So Texas is a very strong economic center for the country. And of course, we have a border. We're a border state. And so we have a very robust economy. The supply, and we have a port, right? So we're really feeling, or we can see, and we're learning from kind of on the ground, we sort of hear what's going on in terms of this tremendous demand from the consumers, because there has been a good amount of fiscal stimulus and people are able to save and continue to buy, right? But then this has mucked up our supply chain a bit. And this is a global issue. And as as much as we think about Texas and the United States, this is a global economy. And so that's why things are a little bit clogged up at the moment. And it's affecting our, price control as well. So we've got a little bit of inflation happening. So the economists at the bank are really watching that closely to determine whether or not how this will unwind eventually. But we're a major player in that we have such a large amount of workers, supply, a strong economy, tremendous exporting and importing. And so we are constantly looking at sort of keeping our ear to the ground as the canary in the coal mine in Texas for the economy about this very unfortunate, situation. I went to the grocery store last night and I noticed the shelves. Well, I know we have a storm coming, but in the weeks before that, things on the shelves are empty, and it makes you a little bit nervous when you see that there's no bread or there's no chicken. And so this is something that I think we're going to have to keep our eye on.
Yeah. And what do you see as the future for that in Texas at least? I mean, should we expect to go to the grocery store and see shortages for months longer, years?
Yeah, from what we hear, the supply chain is not unwound, right? If you go to order a sofa today, it's probably going to be weeks before it arrives in your home. I think the biggest concern are sort of the chips that we all sort of take for granted, semiconductors, which runs so many of the things in our homes, our cars, and et cetera. That's a real concerning issue. And that seems to be a very long, that's a sort of a long-term, they can't keep up with the demand. So that's something that we're keeping our eye on as well.
Yeah. And Ms. Schroyer in Gainesville, I mean, what are the supply chain challenges in the northern part of the state where you are?
The largest challenge that we're probably facing right now as it relates to supply chain is probably having the raw materials that some of our manufacturers are needing to bring in. One of the interesting challenges that a lot of our employers are facing here is that during the pandemic, because they were able to pivot and diversify, they were able to open up to new customers and new, they could provide their product to different supply chains. The challenge with that is now that they've opened up their customer base, they now have an increased supply that they need to produce their product. And we're waiting, weeks, months, sometimes it's going to take up to 6 months to get a particular product in. So therefore it's delaying their next supply chain for their client base. So when we're talking about, the semiconductors and what we're doing to bring some manufacturing here into Texas, but just reshoring to America in general, we did an analysis of the last 2 years of project lead data that we're bringing in, and those are coming from the Governor's Office of Economic Development and Tourism. Those are coming from partners across the state, site selection consultants, and looking at the trends in the industry that we're seeing as these leads are coming in. Last year in 2021 alone, 35% of the leads that Gainesville submitted for, just Gainesville, 31% of the leads that we collected all had to do with semiconductor manufacturing. And when you're looking at the range of industry for the leads that we're seeing, food production was huge in 2020 and continues to be a large presence in terms of this lead generation. But the semiconductors, lithium ion battery manufacturing, that came in second for 2021 in terms of the number of leads that were specifically for that. And these are not small projects. I'm sure, as you know, these are very, very large in terms of their capital investment, their footprint, the job count, and the wages are higher as well. So it is encouraging on one note because we're starting to see the projects that we want to welcome here into our state. They have the higher job counts with the higher wages. That's exciting for a community like Gainesville, where we're actively trying to increase our county average medium income. But again, it is still a challenge as we talk about supply chain issues and workforce. Those are really the two barriers that we're having, that everyone's having, but specific here to Gainesville, those are two of the things that we're most concerned about.
Mitchell, can I jump in real quick on just because I love this topic and I'm glad it was brought up about supply chain. And so what we're doing, again, listening to our EDCs, our chambers, and our business partners, thanks to the governor and the Texas Workforce Commission, we have a diverse group of resources, diverse opportunities there as far as resources that are available to institutions of higher eds, high schools, like training equipment. And so we're training individuals right now. As I mentioned earlier today, there's a gentleman who owns Transcasa there in McAllen, and these individuals donated semi-trailers so that these individuals along the border at South Texas College could actually train their truck drivers. And we're looking at those populations in the past that have been maybe disenfranchised. It's hard to get workers, right? We need good talent. And so industry is telling us, hey, look, what are you doing to reach out to those populations? So we have programs like at Lee College where we're training folks with the CDL simulator behind bars purchased through the JET grant on how to be truck drivers and receive a CDL license. Now, these are individuals that have been formerly incarcerated or currently incarcerated, but they're all receiving a CDL certification. And then, of course, what we're doing along the border by individuals like businesses that are donating the equipment like trucks so that we can actually train these individuals and they're ready to go. So we're training kids in Laredo and other parts of the state on, the logistics through skills development grants, you name it. You've seen the governor at different places around the state where he's been talking about, the workforce needs and how diverse we've been with our resources. We've been very fortunate that we have great partners like our EDCs and folks at the Federal Reserve to work with. And if anything I can tell you is how cool that 2020 and 2021 allowed us to all start blending services. And we've been so successful. Just in the last 2 days, we had a company out of Las Vegas that's going to be moving into Texas talking about the workforce needs and the idea of hiring people that have been formerly incarcerated or transitioning veterans or folks that were placed in foster care. Those are discussions that are taking place as we speak.
Wow. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd just like to add something, and I wholeheartedly agree with the commissioner. And we're fortunate where we're located in Gainesville. We work with the Texoma Workforce Board, and they've been incredible partners. And also our higher educational institution here, North Central Texas College. I was in a meeting yesterday, a site visit, and talking with the company that's coming in. They, first thing they asked, they're like, well, what about your talent? What are we doing in terms of workforce? And I was in a very fortunate position to tell them that we have incredible partners, not only through, our school district, but with Workforce Solutions, and then with our college here, we can, and a lot of communities do, but we can specialize training based on their needs, but it can be ongoing training. And through our efforts of meeting with our businesses, we're learning what is it that you're looking for in an employee, because I think that's one of the things that has come out of COVID is that our idea of what an employee looks like, depending on the industry, has completely shifted because of the impact of COVID, because of the impact on the work-life family balance. So what do you need from an employee? Do you just need someone to show up every day and not be on their phone, and then you can train them to do the job that you need them to do? Or are you looking for someone that has a particular set of skills or education coming into the job? Those are things that us as, the economic developers need to know and need to be listening to. So we communicate back to our workforce boards and partners and say, this is what our businesses need. What can we do to help facilitate the education and training so we're not losing these businesses, the ones that we already have here? We want to retain those, but the ones that we're trying to recruit into the state as well. How can we provide that advantage?
Yeah, Commissioner, we need to talk about the Rio Grande Valley really quickly, because leaders there talk about this dilemma, this challenge they've talked about this for years, of people leaving to go live and work in bigger cities, versus staying home, and working and building their families there. Unemployment in South Texas is still, worse than most of the rest of the state. What needs to happen in the Rio Grande Valley to have a stronger economic recovery from the pandemic?
Well, I think you're seeing changes now taking place. The fact that you have folks like Elon Musk that are making heavy investments by putting SpaceX there. Think of all the companies just in the last 2 years that have actually transformed or have actually relocated to South Texas, like in Mission, where we have Black & Decker. They're looking at increasing the number of employees and the hours of operation, 24 hours. Healthcare, let me just share with you what we're doing there. I mean, we're talking about transforming the way we think and how we train our folks. Just yesterday, we took action on listening to what industry was telling us. What we're looking at right now is putting together an apprenticeship nursing program to kind of expedite, these nurses. We're not trying to water down any type of certification or the degree. All we're saying is, let's listen to industry and tell us what type of nurse are you looking at. We took action yesterday, allowing the agency now to, when we do on-site, and I know that our folks there at Gainesville will like this, but, to open up in childcare deserts, a TRS provider, so that the parents can go back to work and students can go back to school. And so now, just so that you know, we now will allow our TRS provider to actually be on site, Mitchell. So think about SpaceX that are bringing people from all over the world to work there. And we're going to have on-site childcare, a TRS provider. Things are changing. Look, when I was living down there, the unemployment rate was, 2 something. It was 20%. I mean, it was high. 7% is not really that bad, especially when you come from a community that was rural and a farm community. Now you got technology. You have high school students right now, as we speak, that are actually doing welding courses using virtual reality headsets. I mean, that's amazing. And the fact that the agency provides programs like, sponsoring science and technology science fairs. We sponsor FIRST Robotics, these robotic competitions that take place every year. We fund that. And now we've gotten into the space of people with a disability. We now, part of the portion of that funding, because we are looking at workers, is those individuals that are hard of hearing, those that are deaf. We now provide grant opportunities for them to compete. Look, Mitchell, things are changing. Times are changing. We're keeping up with the change. But I will tell you, the quality of life in South Texas is continuing to improve.
I'd like to just sort of jump in on that because there's a lot of work that's been happening really in the last decade around this notion of cradle to career, a pipeline for the workforce. South Texas has been a great example of communities working together, higher ed, K through 12, working to get students to begin to work on their associate's degree while they're in high school. So by the time they graduate, they have associate's degree. They might have an internship. Then they can go bridge over either to a 4-year institution or they might be able to start working. So this notion of a pipeline, a strong pipeline, so that people don't fall out, young people don't fall out after high school, or they can't make the connection to the skill sets that they need for the jobs that employers, are seeking, are putting out there. So I think a great deal of work, particularly in our education infrastructure, particularly in the last session of made tremendous gains in strengthening that pipeline. And I think South Texas is a great example of that.
And Ms. Norman, the commissioner mentioned childcare deserts. I'm wondering how has the hit that the childcare industry has taken during the pandemic impacted Texas mothers from re-entering the workforce?
Yeah. According to some analysis from the Atlanta Fed, women with children under 6 accounted for almost a quarter of the unanticipated or COVID-related decline in employment. That's huge. Not to mention non-college educated women with children under 13. Women or caregivers, and that's a lot of the time, mostly women, were devastated, really, in terms of COVID affecting their employment. And as we know, and as we've learned, I think, through COVID, is that childcare is an essential support system for families so that they can work or work on getting additional skill sets so that they can improve their skill sets. And what we all should know at this moment in time is that the childcare business model is a broken one. It's not sustainable. It's not allowing living wage for the workers. It's not a sustainable model. And so there's a lot of work looking at the childcare model, how to improve that, how to work with employers, how everyone can come around the table and figure out how to fix our long-term quality early childhood. So it's hugely important. And it's something that, our economy has healed from COVID in the sense that our unemployment's back. Our sectors that were devastated have come back to life. We have recovered, but we still sort of have those symptoms of the things that we need to shore up. So for future crisis, or just for a strong economy. And childcare, reskilling, having a strong cradle to career pipeline. These are all digital divide. These are all of the things that we need to keep our eye on and keep working on well past COVID, so that we can have a really strong workforce in a strong economy going forward.
Yeah. And another divide, Ms. Troyer, in Texas is kind of the rural urban divide economically, and it's gotten more pronounced, it seems like, every year. And what do you think the pandemic has highlighted about more rural economies like yours?
I think, speaking specifically to Gainesville, what we've seen since the pandemic, we have seen an uptick in people wanting to move out of the more urban and suburban areas into a rural community. Possibly because it's cost of living, the lower cost of living here. If you have a family, like we said, if you have a caregiver, whether that's the father or the mother, whoever isn't working anymore, obviously your income is a little limited. It's not as expensive to live in an urban area as it is a rural. And more rural areas are starting to provide, comforts and quality of life, such as access to broadband internet, improving on parks and recreation for outdoor, as those are starting to do more remote work. New housing developments are starting to go in, those that are getting their building materials in to put those houses up. So that's been the shift that we've seen here in Gainesville, in terms of the families moving, or the individuals that are maybe, fresh out of school or still early on in their careers. They're starting to make this transition to rural communities, I would suspect because of cost of living. From the business side of things, I think what we see here in Gainesville, when you see the news announcements of this company going to this metro area or to that metro area, it makes sense because of what they're looking for. But what we see as an opportunity to capitalize on is that here in Gainesville and here in the North Texas region, we can offer land, buildings, incentives, workforce, quality of life, and it's usually a lower cost up front to the business moving here than if they were to move into an urban area. That's our competitive edge that we can provide. But in terms of the overall why this is happening and why this is so important for us to keep in mind, I think, again, what the pandemic has shown us is that these are things these are underlying issues that have always been there, but maybe they just weren't brought to the surface to address. So what's important now is, as we're thinking about this, we have a great cost of living. How do we maintain that? We've got land and buildings. How do we maintain that? How do we turn this into a sustainable model? And to steal the phrase, to not turn it into a broken system. This shouldn't just be a one-off. These are things that we need to considerably involve in our strategic planning as we move forward, whether we're a rural community, suburban, or an urban.
And Commissioner, and then Ms. Norman, please jump in along that kind of urban rural question. I mean, Texas has grown so much in the last decade, especially during the pandemic. A lot of attention, on people moving to Texas, largely in urban areas. I mean, what does this growth mean for the Texas economy? Challenges, opportunities?
Mitchell, regardless of where you live in Texas, we can train you. I mean, think of towns like Hebronville, where we're training high school students to be certified welders. There's just such a need for it. Going back to the question of childcare and rural communities and childcare deserts. I mean, we just heard from the EDC, from Audrey, that she's got a building and land. Well, let me have that building and land, and let me put a childcare provider there, because just yesterday with this fifth round of money, and we've already allocated over $3 billion. I mean, we're talking about quality childcare that's out there. And so the money that we took action on yesterday allows us to equip the facility, purchase the things needed to be successful for these young kids. I mean, it pays for, I think, a salary for the first 3 months. I mean, what we're trying to do is encourage folks to actually take advantage of some of these programs that we have. And we've been very successful. Matter of fact, just recently at Campfire First in Fort Worth, I mean, we actually are now taking childcare providers or their staff And they're going through a program, which is one of the first in the country that allow the staff to go through these on kind of like an apprenticeship program. It is an apprenticeship program with their providers. And Tarleton State, the local university there, again, because being creative as they are now allowing college credit so that these people can become teachers someday. So what I'm trying to say is these opportunities are out there. And then we have this program called Metrics, where we're allowing people that are in rural communities to actually take advantage with the help of our Federal Reserve getting broadband service in rural areas, being able to actually get individuals that are at home certified in almost every industry that's out there. I mean, we got over 5,000 certifications that are free to all Texans. And we took advantage of that during the pandemic. Again, these folks were at home. They were able to pick up certifications in the food industry and the office procedures. I mean, it's just an array of programs that we have. And so we took full advantage of that. But I did want folks to know that we do have programs for people that live in rural Texas.
I would say with the commissioners really explaining one of the great things that has happened in the past 2 years is that communities are coming together, solving these complex problems, working collaboratively and leveraging the resources that are coming down, particularly the financial capital that's coming down, to solve these issues. And there's great examples of that. And what we have to do is share what the best practices are, share how, what's happening in East Texas that could be applicable for what's happening in El Paso. And I think that having demonstrations and projects and having innovation and failing forward and coming up with solutions is really kind of in the, everyone is rolling up their sleeves to really solve for it. These are system changes. Childcare is a system that has to be fixed fundamentally in terms of the business model. But there's examples of how to do that. And then how do we adopt that so that can go to scale? We have a lot of ground to cover. So there's great innovation, great work, but it all comes down to workers, employers, government officials, community leaders, philanthropy, working collaboratively together to solve for the issues. And it's amazing to see what can happen when everybody has a shared vision on what they see for their community and can start to make systemic change by providing adaptive leadership, which is what you need for complex problems. And it's great to see that happening in the state.
And we do it the best around the country, Alfreda. We're the best. That's why we're the best place to do business.
Yeah, well, thank you. I wish we could keep going. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Audrey Schroyer, Alfreda Norman, and Julian Alvarez, thank you all so much for joining us.